Good morning. My name is Jeremy. I'm from Twitter, and this morning I'm going to be talking a little bit about how we've been scaling mobile development and mobile development processes at Twitter. So first off, thanks a lot to the OnAndroid folks for having me. And I'm going to take you through a magical journey of folly, hopefully a few smart things, some more folly, maybe a few more smart things. We'll see how it goes. First of all, just wanted to talk a little bit about mobile at Twitter. Like, what does mobile at Twitter mean? What do we even do in mobile at Twitter? So just wanted to give you a little bit of context for the rest of the talk. So mobile at Twitter, there's a couple different buckets of the kinds of things that we do. One is features that are user-facing, and they're done by a variety of different teams. So here's a good example, which is something we recently announced, which is a feature we did with Comcast, where from inside of a tweet that Comcast does, in this example, one that's an NBC-related account, you can actually set your Comcast DVR, and you can change the channel and do all kinds of fun stuff like that. So there's a mobile component to that. Obviously, there's a bunch of back-end stuff and API stuff. So that's kind of one bucket of things. Sort of related, or not related, but like also in that bucket is something we also recently announced called Twitter Alerts. So this is something that like partners like FEMA can use, where they can use their Twitter client to push out alerts to all their followers. So in this case with FEMA, disaster-related information that they can push out, and you get special UX inside the Twitter client. There's special push notifications, and as I mentioned, there's actually UX specific for the FEMA folks, where it's pretty much as easy as composing a tweet, but there's a couple little extra bits of stuff. So that's another example of the kinds of things that is happening in mobile development. So these two first ones are both feature-oriented things that are not really mobile-specific, but there's a mobile dimension to them. So the other kinds of things that and is happening in mobile development at Twitter are platform-specific features. So an example of this would be we added photo filters to Twitter a little bit ago, and then we hardware-enabled them to use the GPU, did things like color space transformations in the GPU in real time, but then also like tone mapping and kind of fun graphic stuff like that. So these types of features are require a little bit more specialized knowledge from the developers inside of Twitter, yeah, there's a couple different kinds of things like this that we've been up to. So another example is messing with the core of Twitter. So recently we released a feature called Conversations, and we dared to screw around with the home timeline, which like everybody was totally cool with. But in the name of progress, moving forward, the blue line. In this case, we're changing some of the basic tenets of Twitter in terms of time-ordered tweets and being real-time, playing with the boundaries between real-time and live, and what do those things mean. So here are core things changing inside the infra of Twitter, API changes, rendering changes. So again, these are the different buckets of things that we do. And then finally, this is we do platform type things. So Twitter Cards is a platform we launched a little while ago, and in this case you can see there's a tweet. It has a open in Foursquare link at the bottom, and when you click that, the Foursquare app launches, and you get taken with a deep link right inside of that. So sort of a bunch of different big buckets. A bucket of kind of feature-oriented stuff, buckets of like more platform-specific, and then into these like kind of core changes to Twitter. So over the last year, this has only been accelerating. The pace of which we're trying new things and putting new things out has been amping significantly. So that's sort of the context for what kinds of things are happening in mobile at Twitter. And so the rest of my talk, I'm gonna talk about, in specific with mobile, how do we deal with all that. So one last little bit of context, which is the history of engineering at Twitter as it pertains to mobile. I think it's interesting because it sort of sets the stage for what the challenges have been, what the culture and the environment from an engineering perspective has been, not mobile specific, but that we then have had to figure out how to map mobile into. Early on in Twitter's infancy, it's pretty well known we weren't the most totally rock solid, stable thing in the whole universe. And a large part of that was, we were doing, I think, the right thing, trying to get product market fit, trying to figure out what we were all about. And we were implemented as a monolithic Rails app, probably like the world's most heavily used monolithic Rails app. So super awesome for a number of reasons, super not awesome for stability, scalability, that kind of stuff. So it was cool because you could stand all of Twitter up on your laptop, easy to understand. Not so cool because it just could not handle. It was a very expensive thing for us to run, and so on and so forth. So the antidote for this a couple years ago was to decompose our monolith into a service-oriented architecture. So we took this huge Rails code base and started breaking it down into a number of different services. We decided to move from Rails onto the JVM. So initially this meant a lot of Java, but also a lot of Scala, which is a functional language if you're not familiar with it, also based on the JVM, based on Java, and that lets us get great horizontal scalability. So in thinking about Twitter, and if you're interested in this kind of stuff, which touches on mobile but not so much, there's other talks that we've given about how we scaled our backend, but we broke Twitter down into a ton of different services, implemented generally in Scala, generally talking to each other in Thrift. Shout out to Facebook, thank you for your Thrift. Open source component of Facebook's that talks back and forth inside of our data center, and then externally we talk to the world with HTTP to our clients. So that was a huge shift of how we did engineering and how we thought about engineering, and a big part of Twitter maturing and growing up as an engineering culture. And so the impact it had on engineering is what it really means to be a back-end engineer at Twitter is that you're working on disparate services. And sometimes you're standing up your own service to do something cool and new, and that service is fitting into this big network of services that do everything from route things to hydrating tweets and looking up things, crawling things, doing indexing. And sometimes what you're doing is modifying existing services and figuring out how to collaborate with the service owners. And occasionally, like, not that it happens all the time or anything, but there might be services that don't totally have owners anymore. And so that's been exciting as well. So all this is sort of setting the context for what engineering in general is like that the mobile part of Twitter lives in. And the last thing I want to mention is that in the past year alone, we've doubled the number of engineers at Twitter. So mobile is sitting inside of that as well, with this capability to have all these disparate services that not only scales our infrastructure, but also scales our development process. We've taken advantage of that and staffed up, which is super cool, and it's led to lots more features that I alluded to earlier, and also lots more focus on stability and scalability. So, on to the mobile part. So, the history of mobile at Twitter is actually, I think, pretty interesting. We started out with basically a couple folks sort of literally off in the corner. A lot of the company not really knowing that we were doing mobile, and basically the mobile folks are hitting the public API, the same public API that everybody else was hitting initially, and every once in a while somebody from some back-end service team would be like, what the hell's going on with the load on this endpoint? What could it be? Is it a denial of service? Is it this? Is it that? And it's like, oh, sorry, it's the mobile team. We forgot to mention we added this cool new feature, and it is hammering some endpoint. So that was pretty cool, although it was cool from the standpoint that mobile could just run fast and do whatever they wanted. Not as awesome from a company business objective kind of standpoint. And what started to change about this is really the realization that while we started as a mobile-first company at Twitter, and we started out as an SMS-based platform, really we had over time evolved into a web-oriented company and API-based service. And really, the kinds of things we wanted to do and wanted to bring, the value we wanted to bring to users, we realized along with a lot of the other peer companies in the industry a couple years ago that really we wanted to be mobile first. And so that evolution from the business side of Twitter all of a sudden brought in a whole bunch of different components of the company, like super excited about mobile. And so what used to be like a dark corner of folks just like rocking out doing what they wanted, all of a sudden had a huge spotlight of attention from all these different parts of the company. So different categories of folks. We'd have service folks who were doing some cool new service or API, and they're like, sweet, how do I get this thing used by mobile, coming in and asking questions. Or product managers or designers who were doing things on the web, adding these features and are like, oh man, how do I get some like mobile lovin'? And they would come to this poor mobile team and try to get on the backlog. And pretty soon, this like awesome agile backlog of the mobile team was like, you know, anything that they were thinking about was somewhere in there. And then there's this massive list of stuff coming from all these disparate parts of the company, many of whom were not really educated on kind of, you know, the mobile kinds of things that that we all think about when we're thinking about mobile. So in thinking about like, you know, what this sort of was like initially worked okay, but then as the more and more people from different parts of the company, as the company grew and the number of things we were thinking about doing grew, this became pretty untenable for the mobile team. So our first pass at trying to address this was to make what we call V-teams, where we basically were embedding a mobile engineer on loan, because we didn't have very many, into some feature team. So we'd have some team that was working, the example I gave earlier, like the Twitter alerts or the Comcast thing, setting the wayback clock to something that, a feature like that, imagine what those features would have been in the past, and taking a mobile engineer and loaning them into that team temporarily. So this was sort of cool in that engineer is now embedded with that team, and in general, teams that sit together and work together work better. But they weren't really on the team. They were just there temporarily. The team didn't know if that engineer was going to be there long term. That engineer didn't really have time to get domain expertise on that particular feature, whether it was some relevance-based feature, search-based feature, that you know, whatever it is. So that was really problematic. Some other big issues related to this are there isn't really a sense of ownership over that mobile code. So when that you know, who owns that? Is it the engineer who temporarily did it and we just hopped onto that feature, or was it the team that needed to support that long term? So it's sort of like some pretty gnarly problems. And then also in just thinking about teams and scaling engineering practices inside of a bigger company, you're wanting to think about things like the career of these mobile engineers, or like how do you get feedback on like how good of a job you're doing? How's the 360 feedback work into like, you know, how good is the manager at that stuff really got lost because these folks are just transiently popping around the company. It was great for knowledge sharing, so there were definitely some pluses, but overall not the most awesome experience. So the next evolution in broad strokes of how we thought about mobile at Twitter is to build full stack teams with permanent mobile expertise and experience. So I'm going to talk a whole bunch more about that, but just conceptually the idea being we're not going to just temporarily loan somebody, but like if you're at a party and you're talking to somebody and they're like, dude, where do you work? And they're like, oh man, I work at Twitter, it's awesome. And they're like, what do you do there? And they're like, oh, I do this cool relevance stuff. And they're like, sweet, how's that Scala? And they're like, oh, I don't know, I work on Android. But just trying to flip it so that the primary identification of folks was like the cool badass feature that they're doing, and mobile is just a component. It's like the platform that they're putting it out on, as opposed to being like, I do mobile and I get dragged into a bunch of different stuff. So the primary model at this point is full stack teams, which does not mean we don't have a platform team. We still have a mobile platform team that's building the core and also thinking about like cross-app concerns and ultimately shipping the app. But a lot of the development is happening on feature teams that are full stack. So I wanted to kind of, you know, set that context, but now I want to talk a little bit about specific challenges that we've had in doing that and what we've tripped over and what's gone well. So the first and biggest challenge that as a kind of a category has been culture. So the culture shift in both mobile engineers and the rest of the engineering and product organization of Twitter has been sort of some of the biggest stumbling blocks. And here's, especially when it relates to Android, here's been one of the #1 problems, has been iPhone, basically. The fact that 2 years ago, or a year, even as recently as maybe a year ago, everybody in the company is carrying an iPhone in their pocket. And so our Android team is all carrying Android phones and super excited about Android, but all the designers, the product managers, the back-end technologists, the executives, all carrying this device in their pocket. And so that's great for that platform, but as many of you in this room probably know, that's what the world is starting to look like more and more, where we have explosive Android growth. And I don't think, iPhone's going anywhere, but Android is rapidly becoming this platform, especially internationally, that you just can't ignore. And for a little while, we really were thinking about mobile as just as a monolith of like, oh yeah, and mobile. And as the company got a more nuanced understanding, we realized we should be thinking about these platforms very differently, Android and iOS. These are the only 2 platforms we do in-house, Android and iOS. We do have other clients that are official Twitter clients, but they're largely developed out of house, whether it's Windows Phone or BlackBerry or others. So, so the first step in shifting culture inside the company was just to make sure everybody really understood that. It's not like, oh yeah, mobile, aka iPhone. Oh yeah, and then that Android thing. In fact, really, it's like, dude, like mobile, it's Android and then iPhone. And in fact, some of the ways we shifted that culture is whenever we do presentations inside the company, whether it's to the whole company at once or whether it's on particular features, in many cases we present, and even to this day, but certainly there's a concerted effort to present the Android screenshots first, and to talk about the Android features first, to start to shift and turn that thought process. And the getting the design team educated on what they needed to do and to think about whenever we're presenting things, don't just present mobile as a monolith, but present, here's how we're thinking about this feature or this idea when it comes to Android, and here's how we're thinking about this when it comes to iPhone and potentially other platforms. The other thing that we did was to get people the phones. So a lot of phones. So basically, the manager of the Android team became like an Android pusher. And so we started that out with phones like either the Galaxy or the Moto X, which is super cool and sexy and easy to get in the hands of our executives and product managers and designers and other engineers. And lately, we've been migrating to pushing super, super sweet Android phones like this Samsung, which is like got a 2G card in it. And it's a little painful, but this is globally, internationally, this is a brand new phone with a brand new CPU, with a reasonable GPU, little memory constrained. It's extremely inexpensive, and this getting people to understand and think about what our customers are really using, and making sure that we're using that internally. That has been a big part of that culture shift, is figuring out how to get people to use and understand these things. Finally, in the culture shift, one of the big things has been getting people just to understand that mobile and a lot of the things that they've learned at either past companies or at Twitter, it's not like the web. Like, we can't just deploy a hotfix in 10 minutes, roll something back in 3 or 4 minutes. When we put a build out, that build is for permanence out there. Totally, we can put out a new build, but the old build may never be uninstalled. And thank God there's auto update on Android, and finally on iOS 7 we have auto update of apps, so that we don't have to completely rely on somebody going to the either the Play Store or the App Store. But even still, the reality, especially on some of these devices, is that it can take 15 minutes to install a beefy, if the app is like 4 megabytes. In Brazil or in India, it can take a really long time to update. So when we put something out, we need to have everybody understanding that thing is out there for life. And hopefully people will update, but we really can't control that. So that's a big shift in mentality and thought process, sort of a baseline thinking. And that is something that has been a culture shift throughout the whole org. So I've talked a lot about culture shifts that have had to happen with the folks at Twitter who weren't mobile savvy. But as we've been building up the mobile team, there's a flip side of the coin, which is that we've had to have a culture shift in mobile folks coming in, or mobile folks that we've had at Twitter. So the folks that got to be left alone in a corner, like the whole world's changing. All of a sudden, all of Twitter is super excited about mobile and mobile development. And traditionally, they've kind of been a little more isolated and individual, and maybe, you know, if they're working in a team, it's a small team of a couple people. And now they're having to interoperate inside a much bigger company. So that was sort of maybe a little bit of a non-obvious shift in scaling out mobile development, is the realization that, you know, a lot of the folks that we were hiring, whether they're coming out of, you know, maybe doing, maybe they had worked at a big company before, but branched out, you know, did some cool indie stuff or individual stuff, and then are excited to come in and help us take mobile forward inside Twitter, now have to figure out, like, oh, well, how do you have this little tiny code base that a whole bunch of people are partying on? I'll talk more about some of the technical ramifications of that, but just even the social ramifications of being used to being the only one or one of two people, maybe three people who are in that code base, now having to shift that mindset to, whoa, like there's a bunch of people all kind of partying on this relatively compact code. Another big change for us has been the shift in mindset for mobile folks away from the grand reveal. So, like, especially I think it's a big thing that in our mobile culture, more maybe on the Apple side that gets propagated, but certainly from the consumer electronics perspective in general, is like, you know, I'm going to work on it, I'm going to polish it, I'm going to make it awesome, it's going to take me like 5 months, and then I'm going to reveal it to the world, and it's going to be amazing, and everybody's going to love it. Like, I'm going to get everything right. Every guess is going to be perfect. I totally get the user. Oh, sugar. Maybe there's some challenges or things that we didn't understand, and especially when you have lots and lots of users like Twitter does, we can't understand all the ramifications of any change for surezies. So shifting from the mindset of we're going to work on something for quarters and quarters or a year and then just unveil it and it'll be perfect, that's a big change. And the rest of Twitter does not operate with that engineering-wise with that mindset. We're a very experiment-driven culture. And I'm going to talk more about the technical challenges, but just culturally that was sort of like getting people over that hump. And I think some of the problems with getting over that hump, or some of the preconceptions around experimentation is like, you know, hey, like if you don't, you know, maybe there's two ends of the spectrum, a misconception that one end of the spectrum is the grand reveal and the other end of the spectrum is spaghetti against a wall. You don't really know what you want to do. You're just throwing out a whole bunch of random features and experimenting, and then we'll just see what sticks. And I think the general belief that I have, that folks at Twitter have, is that those are not opposite ends of the spectrum. You can and should have amazing hypotheses based on user research and understanding of empathy with the user. The reality is nothing survives first contact with the user, and we should figure out, like, what did we get wrong out of that amazing vision. So that shift in understanding has you know, around being a measurement-driven culture where, like, yes, we have amazing ideas, and then we measure the crap out of them to see what's really happening. That shift has been a little bit hard. And I think one of the reasons it's been hard is that people have learned these things over time, and it's become more ingrained. And as we scale rapidly and we take on people from different diverse backgrounds, that has made us a lot stronger as a company, but it's also meant that we have to find some common ground for unification. And we are an opinionated org when it comes to measurement. So actually, Eric Ries's book has been awesome for giving people like the super fast primer on, you know, kind of like, wait, I don't understand. Like, are you saying we should just like let the users randomly decide by statistics what's good, or should I have a design hypothesis, or how do I mesh these two things? It's been really helpful to throw Eric's book at people and be like, cool, check this out. This is, you may or may not agree with everything in here, but like this gives you the primer on a general understanding of how the whole like kind of build, measure, test cycle works. So that's it for culture, but I want to kind of get into a little bit of logistics and sort of what some of the challenges have been in scaling mobile logistically for us. So the first thing to mention, and I know I'm talking to a room full of folks doing Android development, but this has had a huge impact on our mobile process. Some of which is good, some of which we're recovering from, but basically the App Store process, the Apple App Store process has impacted us in how we think. It's sort of helped form thought process, and some of it we've had to overcome, and some of it has been helpful. But basically what I'm talking about in specific is what used to be a 15-day review process where you code your app and you submit it and then you wait to get feedback. I think the thing that, when I look back at what happened and how we thought about things in mobile development, how this really impacted us, we're like, well, heck, if they're going to take 15 days to review it, we better QA the bejesus out of this thing to make sure that it's worth that, we get it right, so that when we put this into the review process, we're sure that there's no bugs, that we don't have to go around some really fast loop. And if we're gonna, so maybe 2 weeks for this process, and I'll talk more about dates in a minute. And then if we're gonna QA it that much, we better make sure we got lots of features, because we don't wanna, we don't wanna just like do a small little feature and then QA it a whole ton and then put it into the App Store review process, and we better make sure that like there's a whole bundle of stuff. And so what in practice this has meant is couple weeks, maybe 2, of like coding features, and then a QA process where we're looking at it for about a week with a combination of automation and humans, and then bake it for a week just to make sure that we really understand like that everything's like stabilized, because it also can be a little scary when you're putting things out to Twitter scale number of users, like, oh God, I hope we get this right. And then afterwards, some time to measure it. So time to have all of our logging and experimentation processes run to get us statistically significant results. Oh, and probably a hot fix or 2 somewhere in there, because despite best efforts, we probably still screwed something up. So that horrendous cycle time, leading to this just horrendous cycle time, has been something that it just sort of snuck up on us, that we got to this point where we're like, whoa, this is very unagile. For a company that's started itself with like, be lean, go fast, screw it, we'll do everything in Rails, and MySQL, and then eventually once we found our way, like then investing the engineering effort, I think some really smart things, not in a happy place that we got ourselves to with mobile, despite having that core culture. So I'm going to talk a lot more about the things that we did to try to get around it, but this is sort of some of the ugly side of where we had ended up circa maybe a year ago, 6 months ago even. So in wanting to do all those features and in wanting to have all these teams contribute to mobile, I'm going to shift gears just for a minute and then come back to some of the things that we did around that. We really were like, man, we have a bunch of missing pieces here on these teams. Like, we want to do these full stack teams. We just do not have enough capabilities, enough engineers for all these disparate features that we're doing. So like our first thought was like, we need to hire. Like, whoa, we just need more folks to be able to do all this stuff. And then in going through the hiring process, we're like looking for like mobile developers, and it's, despite having a whole room full of you, like, I see unicorns everywhere. It's just like really hard to hire mobile folks. And so we're like, what are we gonna do? And the kind of irony is, as we would bring in mobile folks and say like, cool, like we have this like awesome feature over here and we'd like to have you embed in this team and this will be your thing, we realized that for a lot of the things that we're doing, especially as we've done more and more and more stuff at Twitter, more and more different features, realizing that for a lot of mobile developers, it's like not like the most amazing. Like many of the things that we're doing, it requires mobile expertise that we can't get around, but like, little dribs and drabs of it. So operating inside of a bigger feature, it's like, we'll do this, week and a half of work to enable this on mobile, and then kind of just like hang tight while we go through that horrendously long cycle of iterating and measuring and testing. So we're like, whoa, this weird dichotomy, like we don't have enough, and yet people are like not feeling the most engaged ever. Like, how did we end up in this spot? What do we do? And our what we came to ultimately is, what we really want to do is, yes, hire mobile expertise and hopefully put them on things that are super engaging and full time, but we also really need to train. So we need to take the huge number of engineers that we have that are super smart and figure out how to give them enough mobile expertise such that when they're doing their crazy backend thing or their crazy machine learning thing, and they need that week and a half of mobile feature or whatever they need to do to enable, they can just do it. They don't have to go and borrow a mobile resource, so we don't have to have somebody who's like super expert in doing animation on mobile, like to do that one enabling thing that they need to have happen. So that was like a huge like, whoa, of course, this is how we should do it. And we actually acquired a company and started Twitter University, which is both internal facing and some external facing stuff around not just mobile, but Scala and some other stuff. And Twitter University, holla, super awesome. But from the mobile perspective, and specifically around Android, but iOS too, we've really been taking this training approach. And the interesting thing was, it was sort of like, okay, we just need to train people to be able to commit mobile code. And so we did that. We started training from an engineering perspective, boot camps, and just the basics. We also realized that this was great because from a continuing education perspective, as we were bringing people in and we needed them to better understand like low-end Android, like crazy bandwidth stuff we needed to do, whether it was battery life stuff or whether it was, as we got more into like kind of the high-end GPU photo filtering stuff and then thinking about how to make that work across a huge variety of devices, we had continuing education to work to do as well. So that was great. So this has been great, but the thing that was a little less obvious is the need to train other folks inside the company. So basically mobile sensitivity training, for lack of a better term, and also some care and feeding of your mobile engineers, because we have all these phenomenal engineering managers, many of whom do not have mobile experience, suddenly managing mobile engineers and not necessarily understanding the things that many of you in this room know about, like well, if I use this API, maybe I should figure out if that API is also in a which API level is that available in, and helping people understand, helping managers understand what those kinds of things that we just all take for granted is something that we realized we needed to be able to train as well. So the scary reality of this is, from a contributor basis, we in the past year have 10x'd our contributors into the mobile code bases. Actually, I think it might even be in the last 6 months. So that is like a ginormous like onslaught from the perspective, at least, of the folks that were in the corner at the beginning. That is like an onslaught of like code contributions coming in. So talking about like scaling mobile development, to some degree it's like, congrats, success, you did it. And then it's like, like a million contributions coming in. And the sort of interesting stat around it also is that when we look at it by like patch, by actual committed features, even though we did a 10x contributor bump, we really only got a 5x patch bump in terms of like the sort of feature flow. So we had all these people coming in, and initially we're like, wow, is this a problem? We're not getting as much throughput. And I think ultimately we came to realize, like, no, this is semi-desired. Like, many of the people that are contributing, we realize we have this ecosystem of contributors inside the company, where some are, like probably many of you in this room, like hardcore, you live and breathe and think mobile. Some are, that amazing Scala engineer who is doing some amazing HTTP 2.0 speedy work, and needs to figure out, like, how can I enable this in the Android client? Like, can we make our API stack HTTP 2.0 aware? So it's not like their main deal in life, but they're making these contributions. So their contributions are coming at a different pace because they also have a day job doing their Scala stuff or whatever else they're doing. All that notwithstanding, the reality is we still value, have, and need the sort of rocket scientists, like, this is my deal, mobile coding. And you can imagine with that onslaught of new folks, while these folks are very senior from an absolute engineering perspective, they're actually fairly junior from an Android experience or an iOS experience perspective. So we have this this mix of engineering skill sets. And so we're like, oh wow, what do we do about that? How do we manage all these contributions? So we leaned on code reviews and pair programming as a way to do that, which is, if you haven't seen the Atlassian video, like, it's awesome on spooning, code spooning. Anyway, so we leaned on code review and pair programming, and I think one of kind of the ugly lessons we took away from all this is that we really leaned on that too hard. And And so what ended up happening was we had a small number of folks that were really capable of being that expert reviewer, and they were largely either in the core team or key places throughout the company. But really, we were number one, burning them out. But number two, they're largely contextless on the code that they're reviewing. If they're reviewing some super specialized networking stack code, or even something like the Comcast example, or different things that the Twitter alert stuff, they don't really understand the core thing that team is trying to do, and vice versa. That team's struggling to explain with limited kind of Android vocabulary, like what they're really trying to make have happen. And the sort of other thing that came out of this is not really a ton of accountability on like who, okay, there's a bug in that, like something crapped out. Like, is that the reviewer that messed up? Like, do we say, hey, why'd you let this code in that you don't necessarily have domain knowledge of what it's trying to do? Or is that the super smart but more junior and experienced Android developer where we're like, why did you make bugs in your code? Oh, or did think through this, didn't think all the way through this. So that, and then ultimately from a management perspective, our engineering managers are like, I don't know, they don't even necessarily see the entire scope of the problem, because they see what their person is contributing, but they may not see the amount of work that goes into it from a code reviewer or a mentor, and how much is happening. So they're like, wow, this relatively junior guy is amazing. He's just contributing all this amazing code. And really it's true, but also the unseen part is heavily backed up by these reviewers. So that was really problematic for us. And unfortunately, I think we're even still digging out of it a little bit, but what we've come to understand is, while sort of intuitively optimizing for a local maximum, we're like, okay, let's build like a really awesome system for like checking out a buddy so that you can get this person code reviewing. Let's go after all our experts. We got to this point where we're like, actually, what we're really looking for is more embedded experts inside the teams. We're looking for more accountability and more responsibility from the different teams for the code that they own. And when we flip the model from being like a gate-kept model where you have to get a buddy to review your code before it can come in, we flipped it to, nope, your team can commit code, but like you're totally responsible for it. So maybe you should ask for some help. That has really gone a long way in helping us clear up this kind of bottleneck and accountability problems around buddies. So I want to switch gears just a little bit into some other logistics and deployment kind of related issues. Another fun misstep that we made was around our merging and branching strategy. And this is something where it's sort of one of these things where you're like, hey, these things look the same, so I'll make them the same. And then you realize later, as the system evolves, you've coupled things and you don't really have good separation of concerns. So this particular foible was taking our master code line and saying like, cool, if you want to deploy, if your code wants to get out into the market, you should be in master. And conversely, if you're in master, your code will deploy. And so totally reasonable, makes sense. And then the reality, though, is as we've worked to speed the pace of deployments, where are you supposed to put code that you don't want to have deploy? And the answer to that has been like, oh, well, that should be in a feature branch. And so as there are more contributors and more teams and more features, there's more feature branches, many of which are maybe not ready. They've missed a release train, and they're not ready to deploy, so they're staying out of master, and they're dutifully updating themselves from master. But then we have like the awesomeness of like massive like feature trains all like colliding into master all at the same time. It's super sweet. I'm sure nobody's ever experienced that before in this room. But so not really the behavior we want to do in Cent, and it's only getting worse over time. And one of the things that essentially, despite having Jenkins and Garrett and all these great tools, really we're not really using them the way we want to get us continuous integration. I mean, to be sure, there are nightly builds running and builds running on commits, but because all these things are happening increasingly in feature branches, we're really not getting the desired effect. We're sort of subverting, the purpose of continuous integration, getting us to have lots of small commits all the time. So another one of those things that sort of just snuck up on us. It's like, When did it go bad? I don't know, but it's behind us somewhere, and we're now in this unfortunate spot. So the solution for us is something that we did on the web in 2009. I think it was Flickr that wrote a pretty awesome blog post paper on feature switching on the web, and it's kind of standard MO, standard practice on the web. And so we've recently implemented a feature switching system for mobile where basically everything should be in master. You should just be dark. Your feature, your code, everything should be in. It just should be off. If you don't want it deployed, cool, it's off. And if you do want it deployed, sweet, flip that thing on. So that has given us, starting to give us the ability to get around that need for everybody to be forced to be off in feature branches. So we don't dictate to engineers like you should or shouldn't use Git this way, you have to branch in this strategy. They can still have feature branches. We would just like to get into a world where you're not forced. It's an engineering choice how you want to branch, not a deployment related strategy. There's sort of an interesting side effect of the feature switches, which is that in a fragmented post-deploy world where normally our only recourse to fixing a screw-up is to like go, oh my god, hotfix, we have a few more options now. So in general at Twitter, as I mentioned, we have feature switching on our backend and on our web platform. So if there's something, somebody does a bad deploy, and for whatever reason we don't want to roll that back, we can just choose to dark something that's happening in the API. But now we have that ability on the mobile side, so that we can say, whoa, there's a problem. There's a chance that we actually can use a feature switch to change what is on or off in the mobile app, and segment that. And so I'm going to go into a couple quick examples, real-world examples. These are unfortunately not real-world examples where we've been able to use feature switches. These are examples of where it would have been awesome to have a feature switch. So one is when we originally went out with filters, we had software filters, and that was a fast way to market, but we replaced them with a version that used the GPU. And so like many phones have sad GPUs. I don't know a better way to put it, like broken GPUs. Maybe I should say that. Oh, compromised GPUs. I don't know the politically correct thing to say. But basically, we realized that when we put this out into the market, we had a bunch of different phones where photo filters were crashing. And the thing that sucks about that is when we're like, hey, tweet photos, it's awesome. And then you try to do anything and it crashes when you're trying to tweet a photo. That's highly unfortunate. It would have been, so we hotfixed that, yay. But that takes time and has code configuration, yada yada, branching, deployment. What would have been much more awesome is just to say, okay, for these phones, dark photo filters. So yeah, it's a bummer that users I thought there was filters on Twitter, but at least they can still post photos and they're not hard crashing. So another example is recently we had an issue where right-to-left language rendering was crashing. So we're like, crap, that's highly unfortunate. We have users who are using languages that are right-to-left rendered, and they're just, the app is crashing. And so we're like, what can we do? And the answer, unfortunately, at circa this time frame was to hotfix. But it turned out we isolated that to a problem with type ahead, where as you're typing something on Twitter, we give you some nice type ahead suggestions. And we realized, oh, right to left language with type ahead is what's crashing. Would have been super awesome to be able to say, okay, sweet, in locales with right to left language rendering dark type ahead. It's a bummer. We love the type ahead feature, super useful, but would have been much better to be able to just dark it. And I guess the thing that also I'm not mentioning around the segmentation is just for this build. So for all the previous builds and all the future builds, leave it alone. But for this one build that's got a problem, let's give our phenomenal incident response team a huge control panel of switches. So sort of two ways to think about switches, basically, feature switches. One is thinking about them as literally switches around features, and they're kind of about, I'm going to put this out, I'm not ready yet, so I'm darking my whole feature. Another way to think about it is architectural or system-based switches, where you have hundreds, if not thousands, of switches in the app, and they're around things you would never normally consider turning off, but in the case of incident response, you have suddenly this set of Apollo, was it 11 or 13? I don't know, whichever the one was where they had to build the thing with the duct tape and they only have the few parts that are out there. Having that app in the wild and going, okay, how do I solve this puzzle with the following switches is something that we're really excited about being able to do. Talking briefly, one last thing about feature switches is they have a interesting impact on culture, which is the whole kind of culture that I talked about that we sort of reverse engineered on our own from the App Store was like, okay, like make sure the code is like perfect before we put it out. Like it has to be really, really perfect. Feature switching eases us into a world where we can say, you know what, code's never going to be perfect. But now at least we have some mechanism for responding to these incidents so that we're not like so holding on so tight to this impossible ideal of perfect quality, but we can say, okay, yes, we're going to do all kinds of things to try to get quality good, but right when we get to that diminishing return line on our quality graph, we're just going to stop the madness. It's still not as high, that where we stop probably won't give us all of the crash proof or crash rating that we want, but along with feature switches, we can get the rest of the way. We have some responsibility, and then ultimately, of course, hotfixing. So I briefly talked a little bit earlier about experimentation, and I just wanted to mention sort of some interesting stuff about Twitter and experimentation. One of the ways we've been able to handle the scaling of mobile development and thinking about, like, you have all these contributors, like how on earth with this singular app do you enable all these people to run fast? Like, do you have like some central arbiter that is like, yes, great feature, no, terrible feature? Like, how do we, that's maybe really exciting for that arbiter, probably not, but it's really disempowering for our teams. And really, even though Twitter has a huge number of engineers, to me, it feels like an incubator full of startups. Teams are all kind of small, single-digit number of folks, and everybody always feels like they're starved for resources, despite having all these huge number of engineers. So how do we do that? And the answer is with experimentation, where basically any team inside of Twitter can experiment to anything up to 1%. And that's kind of like almost a catchphrase. As it turns out, when you have as many users as Twitter does, 1%'s a lot of people, and it's not necessarily what you need to be statistically significant. But it's the point is just the freedom to be able to move forward with your feature and experiment, knowing that you're only deploying to a smaller number of people, and then you can fail fast and iterate and figure out what the heck, which end is up before you go to this huge world. We do incidentally have more of a benevolent approver when it comes to dialing things up from 1% to 100, and just to try to keep our app coherent. But in terms of just getting that velocity, as we know, many things that we think are a good idea turn out to maybe not be, and so we don't want to spend too much time. We want to be able to fail fast on those. And so that goes along with, we have a ton of measurement. We, like probably many of you or many other of our peers, we measure everything, or at least as much of everything as we can. So knowing, really trying to understand how our users are using the app. And it's only increasing for us. It only has been increasing, the number of experiments that we're doing. And so that's sort of got its own fun stuff when it comes to like people saying like, hey, I noticed this problem in the Twitter app. And I'm like, what are you, what? That's not the Twitter. Oh, cool, experiment, got it, okay. So it's making some super exciting challenges around our user support. But anyway, that's, yay, figuring it out. I want to talk just really briefly about how we're starting to use, also in sort of scaling that development process, the new features of the Google Play Store with the beta. We have recently moved into a system where on Android, it sucks that we can't do this on iOS, but on Android it's awesome, where we can get something out, and instead of just trying to like hope that our automation caught it, we actually can put it in the hands of real users, and then we have like kind of nightly internal builds, of course, but then we know we can go to a pool of about 10 times our nightly build users, and then a order of magnitude again up into our beta pool, so that we can see how this thing is working. And when I say see how it's working, there's this awesome software, Crashlytics, which we liked so much that we bought the company, and then made it free for everybody, because we're like cool guys like that. But Crashlytics gives us tremendous visibility on Android and on iOS into what's happening with our software from a crash perspective. It's one thing to like have your logging tell you what's wrong, but when things go bad, the logging doesn't work so good, and that's where Crashlytics is really great to hook in and let us know what the deal is. So all that taken together, we have this, like I showed before, sort of this gnarly, like, it's almost, I don't want to say the number, it's embarrassing, but like 6-week plus iteration cycle, which is not like what you want for fast innovation. And we've been able to say, okay, well, let's largely take much of the human component out from the testing side, and we'll use our black box testers to inform our automation and try to move ourselves to much more of a test automation based world. So that's cool. That helps us remove one phase. And then using the beta program and feature switching, maybe we'll put some of the stuff that used to be pre-launch, we'll make that post-launch, so that that we really can get our cycle times down to a week. And so we found that we can deploy code on the Android platform on a weekly cadence. We've been doing that for maybe a month and a bit now. So the sort of last piece that I haven't really touched on, and I didn't have like an awesome place to put it in the slides, but is we realized that with everything that, giving these phones out to people has been cool, but especially even on iOS now, but especially on Android, it's, there's a lot of devices. And so the other piece that has helped us scale mobile development, and we're really much more nascent than I wish, but building a device lab where we actually have a broader number of devices that we can run our test automation on. And so at this point, we have like the frameworks and the devices, and we're just in the process of building out labs. But really cool, I think a lot of companies are doing some really cool stuff in this space, and this is a big part. Testing on simulator and on emulator is cool, but ultimately a lot of the issues that we find, especially on Android, our top crashers tend to be device-specific issues. I came from the gaming industry, super reminiscent of DirectX, where there's like a lot of different devices, and you got to figure out where the long tail is. But for us, there's a lot of Android users that we care about, a lot of different devices, and so the device lab is a key part of that. So in any event, that's a little bit of the tour of things that that we've run into in scaling mobile development at Twitter. Hope it's been interesting and informative. Super interested to talk to you guys afterwards if you want to come up and chat. My name is Jeremy, and thanks a lot for listening.